It is unfortunate that this phone sucks. I don't recommend the Motorola Moto Z4 as a main phone, simple as that. This phone barely got a single Android update many years ago, but from Motorola, that's not too surprising. That said, there are some benefits and use cases for this phone, so let's talk about it. For one, the phone isn't horrible. On paper, it is worse than the Samsung A15, but also it's not too far off. Feels like there's a delay in swiping and the phone reacting, which I don't get since the touch sampling rate is twice the refresh rate of this phone. Strange. It also has things work before it lets you use it. And what I mean by that is if you unlock the phone and swipe down on the notification shade quick enough, nothing happens. There were some times where I would open up an app and it would kind of just freeze. Not to mention that most apps are just super slow. Now, there is a slim chance that this is an issue with this phone in particular, but I just think that most apps require more out of phones nowadays. This runs Android 10, and for me this works fine. All the apps that I wanted downloaded and worked fine, but I doubt banking ones would have worked, and not every app in general supports Android 10, so I just got lucky. On my Moto Z2 Force running Android 8, not the same situation. This phone has a Snapdragon 675 chip with 128GB of UFS 2.1 storage and 4GB of RAM, which, of all of that, the 128GB aspect is good. This thing is nowhere near being a multitasker, and gaming is not what this is for. It's okay for low-level emulators, think early 2000s handhelds, but graphic-intensive games is not where this is at. Being able to test Genshin Impact is impressive though, as some 64GB phones can technically handle it, but it can't download it. This translates to weak performance overall and a bad battery life even with that 3600 mAh battery cell that's in here. It allows for 15 watts of wired charging, which is slow but kind of expected for a 2019 phone, but after 7 years this battery life is expected, right? Still, somehow not as bad as the iPhone SE. This phone has Bluetooth 5 and Wi-Fi 5, but also 5G, but also not. There's a 5G mod that you can attach to this phone that allows for 5G, but only 5G ultra-wideband 261, but it's something Verizon and T-Mobile technically support. I actually bought this mod for this review and only paid $13 for it the other day, and I will talk about it a little bit later because I was hoping that it would work because I'm using T-Mobile, which is probably the reason why it didn't work. I'll talk about that later. But let's talk about the design first, and yes, this phone is the last phone for the Moto mods, which attaches to the back of the phone using these pins right here. It honestly is a really cool idea that lasted 4 years, and then they just gave up, which I find kind of reasonable. But anyways, on the back there is a matte glass panel with the cutout for the magnets and pins to allow for these mods, like this one. The bottom is where the microphone is, and above that is a massive camera bump to hold the mod in place, like a weird MagSafe design. This is where we get the single 48 megapixel camera as well as the dual LED flash and laser autofocusing unit that's in this glass area. The frame is aluminum with the left side having nothing, the right side having the volume rocker and power buttons, and the top is where another microphone is as well as the loudspeaker for some reason and a SIM and SD card tray. Something that is budget level now, but was the thing for flagship devices at the time besides Google and Apple obviously. Then on the bottom, another microphone, that 15 watt USB-C 3.1 port, and the other budget staple, the headset jack. A first for the Z series outside of the Z Play and Z2 Play. Then of course on the front we have a full screen, kind of, with a U cutout for the front camera as well as the earpiece. Yes, 2 speakers, a first and the only of the Z line, but only allowed for a single loudspeaker, kind of like the iPhone Air, even though that only has 1 speaker in general. This forehead and chin was covered with Gorilla Glass 3, which sits on top of the 6.4-inch 1080p OLED panel that runs at 60Hz and gets fairly bright at about 450 nits. The quality is okay, definitely on the lower side, but really could be worse. There is no always on display, but the peak display was always cool, showing you your notification when you got near the phone, and you can even interact with it all without waking the phone, but the sensor is gone on the Z3 and Z4. Instead, it relies on the proximity sensor, which still works, but inconsistently and is nowhere near what the Z2 Force did. Still better than nothing, but that means no double tap to wake and sleep. The front camera allows for face unlock, and on the bottom of the screen we have the in-screen fingerprint scanner, which works fine, neither perfect or terrible. I will say that the phone does feel slow, but the vibrating motor actually feels great, kind of appropriate for the phone. This phone has a water repellent P2I nano coating design, which essentially means nothing. Don't put this in water or dust. Now, to be honest, that was a lot of words explaining the phone to ultimately get to the fact that the phone is not great. For media, it can be fine, but let's be honest, there's a lot of phones that are good at media as well, and that shouldn't be the reason to buy this phone. The problem that I have is the cellular aspect, as it was literally unusable. Now, I have T-Mobile and this is a Verizon phone, but so are a bunch of other phones that I own, like the LG V60 or Pixel 2, and neither of those have this problem. There are times where coverage sucks, but even in places where I get good coverage, it will either show no signal or edge speeds. I toggle airplane mode on, and sometimes the 4G just comes back and starts working fine, but I can't recommend this phone if you're going to use it like this. It has all the bands that T-Mobile needs. I don't get why the network switching is just trash. When it comes to the cameras, 25 megapixels for the front camera that bends down to 6 megapixels, it looks okay, nothing great like the 1080p 30 frames per second video. The rear 48 megapixel camera is actually not that bad, limiting to 4K 30 frames per second for video, which seems on brand, but definitely bending down to 12 megapixels to give us some shots that are slow to process, but are definitely not bad. You can use the Hasselblad mod for a 12 megapixel zooming shot up to 10 times optically, but the Z4's camera looks way better than this given the half-inch camera size at f1.7 rather than the 1/2.3 inch 12 megapixel camera that has the aperture of f3.5 to f6.5 at a 25 to 250 millimeter equivalent on this mod. It would be interesting to see if this had a processor in the mod in the same way that the Essential phone's 360 camera had a Snapdragon 625 in it, or the fact that the 5G Moto mod has the Snapdragon 855 processor specifically for 5G capabilities. But anyways, this has optical image stabilization and laser autofocusing, so I would say that the camera is fine. It's definitely not as bad as a 2019 budget phone's camera, for sure. Size-wise, this is a 6.22 inch phone, which is kind of tall, but is still on the lighter side at 165 grams. Now, why have this phone? Well, the Moto mods are the reason. You can find phones cheaper than this for emulation or gaming, but for the mods, this is literally the best phone that you can get, kind of. It does suck that it only goes to Android 10. It also sucks that they didn't opt for the Snapdragon 855, but instead put it in a $350 case for the back of this phone. There's also so much to talk about that mod. For one, the case actually has a SIM card in it. This one I bought has a dead battery, so unfortunately it doesn't work that well. I'm also pretty sure that it requires Verizon, if they will even activate it in the first place. It also means, yes, this case has an IMEI. You heard that right. A case for a phone has an IMEI number like a phone does, because it's essentially a phone. I could talk about this forever, really, but back to the Z4. They did make the battery almost 20% larger than the Z3, which is impressive. The width of this phone is actually the smallest of the series, which is strange to me, but this also follows into the mods, and with this, my final thoughts also bring up why this ended and maybe failed. They were forced to put the board essentially at the bottom of the phone, or wrap it around the battery, and somehow connect it to the camera in the middle. Always. So if they add more processing power, then you have more heat, and it can only come from the area where you hold your phone. Then if you move the board all the way to the top, the phone would probably be a little bit thicker, but also the pins would have to extend all the way to the bottom, pulling more power, rerouting this energy, not to mention still create heat and possible latency. All of this meant that Motorola forced themselves into this design with one camera with optical image stabilization, or two without optical image stabilization, and it can't be a certain size. They created the limitations and thought that tech would improve, but they ended up being wrong on this one, just like the 2015 Apple MacBook. That said, I would love to see a Moto Z5. We definitely need those Moto mods to come back. I think that Motorola can earn the $700 to $1,000 price for a really good version of this phone. They just need to put the 50 megapixel camera from the 2026 Razr Ultra or Razr Fold in here, make a mod for an ultra wide and massive periscope camera, throw in a silicon carbon battery with a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 or newer chip, and revive the Moto mods. It would honestly be pretty great. And that's my review of the Motorola Moto Z4, the unfortunate end of interesting phones. But what do you think? Do you have a better use case for this phone other than mods and gaming? Let me know, and as always, thanks for joining the 1%, and thanks for watching.